buongiorno, good morning. I am unfortunately not fluent in Italian, and I apologize for that profusely. I wish that I was, but unfortunately being Canadian, we tend not to speak it a whole lot. But that being said, I am very honored to be able to be here to speak with you today, and it's really fun to actually be here at a developer conference as a security person, because more often than not, I get the, why is he here? And that's exactly why I'm here. So today, my talk is called Barbarians at the Gateway, and I will be discussing various things like web attacks, distributed denial of service, and this is very much not a vendor presentation. However, I do pull a lot of our data from our platform, so just bear in mind that I am using that data. And if you have questions, feel free to throw them at me. I am not averse to those at all. So when I started out in this field, and when I say this field, IT in general, I started out as a rapid application developer. So I come by this sort of thing. Honestly, I found out very quickly that when I went from a team of 50 Java developers back in the 90s to realizing there was exactly one security person in our financial institution that had 55,000 employees, I went, ooh, career opportunity. So my career as a developer was cut rather abruptly short. During that time, since then, I have had all manner of positions, from being a firewall admin right through to being a chief information security officer for a company. I have plenty of scar tissue to prove it. And during that time, one of the things that I learned was I had a mentor tell me, always carry a notebook with you wherever you go. And these days, people look at me like I have three heads. It's like, well, why don't you have an iPad or something like that? I was like, no, these things break down. Paper usually lasts a little bit longer, and I have a stack of books about yay high at home with notes dating back to the mid-90s. So yeah, they do have some duration to them. And through that information that I've saved over the years, I've been able to call all sorts of stories of things that went right and things that went horribly, horribly wrong. And one of the things that I've done over the years is I've made some rather bad mistakes. This isn't a bad thing in retrospect. These were great learning opportunities. And being able to actually share these stories in publications that I write for, like CSO Online or Forbes, it helps me to be able to share it to other people, so hopefully they don't make the same horrible blunders that I did. But that being said, this takes flash forward to now, where I'm working at Akamai Technologies. Actually, if you have a chance this afternoon, my coworker, Giorgio Natali, is going to be speaking at 10 after 5, or 17:10? Yeah, 10 after 5, about unethical JavaScript. And a lot of what I talk about is actually from JavaScript issues. So it's really interesting that way. So I should point out that I'm a Canadian, and one of the really interesting things I find the world over is people have these very skewed views of what a Canadian is, and I blame Monty Python. But that being said, I do enjoy it, especially when I was in India 2 weeks ago, and I was in a hotel lobby, and somebody came up to me and said, "Are you an American?" I said, "Well, no, I'm actually from Canada." And they said, "Good," and walked away, and I went, okay, interesting. That being said, I'm really happy to be able to be here to speak to you today, and I just realized, let's see, is this going to skip? Yeah, okay, so that's an old slide that I didn't take out, but my point for that slide was, whenever I go somewhere, and I travel the world extensively, is that when I go to speaking engagements like this, and I'm coming in, I usually take a picture out the window of the plane, but unfortunately I slept through it coming into Rome this time. But when I do, I usually find stuff like this. So I was coming in to land in New Orleans, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting picture, and I took this from the window, and I went, wait, no. And for those of you in the back, apparently we found Nemo. This really plays into a lot of what I like to talk about, because in the media we see a lot of stories about security-related issues in code, in user behavior, and things like that, and it's usually wrapped up in fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and hyperbole. And this is one of the things that really frustrates me, is just because it looks a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's the case. And this is one of those things where we have to rely rather heavily on the data. Otherwise, I feel very much like this guy on a continuous basis. Now, when we're talking about these security stories in the media, and I've made these sort of mistakes myself, we tend to concentrate on the wrong thing. They'll say, oh, we have a control for X, or we have the machine that goes ping. Thank you, Monty Python. But if you look over here, in this particular case, the threat was very much from a different direction. Now, this is from an amusement park north of Toronto in Canada, and I took... Okay, that's a lot louder than I ever imagined, so I apologize to our sound guy, who I just killed. Anyway, I'm going to skip right past that video, because I wonder if I can mute this locally on my machine. Let's see if that works. If this is loud, I apologize. It's still loud. Okay. So audio issues aside, that video, it was this giant 12-foot Tyrannosaurus Rex that was loud, obnoxious, and scary looking. And my 2-year-old loved dinosaurs up until this point. We got home, he didn't say a word, he walked into the living room, picked up his little bucket of dinosaurs, walked behind my chair, put it down, and he's never touched it again because he thought it was a real threat. And this is something that we really have to be cognizant of when we're talking about security issues, that we're actually talking about the meat of the issue as opposed to getting wrapped up. And media, bless their hearts, I've made the same mistake myself, we tend to go very heavily for the hyperbole because you want to drive eyeballs. And I'm a part-time journalist, for want of a better term, so I don't really tend to go for that route, especially since I've made that mistake before and I've hung my head in shame. So now I'm going to try very hard to skip past the video so I don't kill our audio guy again. There we go. Okay. And when we do concentrate on the wrong things, we end up like stuff like this, where the FBI said a particular iPhone they were trying to gain access to had dormant cyber pathogens. Doesn't exist, but that's okay. So as we go forward, we realize that we concentrate on these sort of things. We realize that if we're looking at the wrong sort of things and we're not managing the message when the auditors come to talk to you, they're going to have some very serious questions wrapped around the wrong things. And these sort of stories, they really left me wanting. They left me wondering, how can we do this better? So that being said, as we go through this, I'm going to look at some of the actors, attacks, tools, transdatas, and what you can do in a very much a uniform way as opposed to a vendor-type pitch. So one of the first things that I came across back in the 90s when I got into the security space, I can't believe I can say that, it was that long ago, were actors for hire. And when I say that, these were threat actors online that were a certain sum of money. They would hack into mailboxes. They would take out your competitor, things like that. This stuff very much is alive and well today, but it was pretty much a new thing back at that time. Now, this is some menu items taken from a Russian underground hacking site roughly about 2-3 years ago. And this was just a sampling in their menu. And if you look down the menu at the bottom, it has DDoS botnet for $700. And I guess this was based on US dollars at the time. And various other things, hiring a DDoS attack for $30 to $70 a day. That price has dropped precipitously since then, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are groups like this, the Hackers List, who set up the site where they could do piecemeal work. So if you wanted to work on security sites or security applications and the company didn't have the bench strength to do it, you could put yourself forward, they could hire you. The problem here was roughly 48 hours after the site went live, all of their user accounts were spread across the internet. That didn't work out so well, but they are still around. So when you're dealing with the types of actors, when you're building your website, when you're building your application, you realize that by virtue of the fact that you're attached to the internet, the attackers are going to come. And it's not because you're working on selling teddy bears. It's not because you're selling centrifuges, although that would have a little bit more of an interest for some people. A great swath of the attackers you have to deal with are the bored kids. And judging by the look in this audience, I'm going to say not a lot of you have teenagers at home. Do some of you have teenagers at home? Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay, oh, we got one, all right. So when I was a teenager, thankfully it was before the internet. We still had cave paintings. But if I had access to the internet, I'm fairly certain that at this point I would have been incarcerated because I didn't have the proper level of guidance that somebody should, and far too often, kids are left at home to their own devices. Both parents are working, things like that, and they have access to literally everything. The internet is a wonderful tool in that respect. There's all kinds of great applications, great information, but if these people don't have the requisite type of understanding as to what is right versus wrong, they can cause themselves a great deal of hurt. And as they get older, they don't realize that they are losing themselves in a collective. And there are groups out there that are more than happy to enlist these sort of disposable workforces. And if they don't really pay attention to what they're doing, these sort of the consequences that they can experience are rather damning in the long term. And these groups that are more than willing to hire them are groups like hacktivists or chaotic actors. And where they may have noble intentions, not all groups that put their operations online, like Anonymous, not all groups are actually anonymous. And that's one of the problems when you have a brand like Anonymous. Literally anybody in this room could spit up their own operation today and say, we're going to attack site X on day Y because they were mean to me. That's the practical reality of it. Now, as you move forward into this attack levels of attackers, you also have the nation states, as we have seen with political entanglements in the United States. Again, we see that propping up in France and Germany as well, where other parties are trying to interfere with the electoral process. This is a real problem that has to be addressed. So you have your standard villains, you have your arch villains, and then you have actual villains where we saw stuff like this. The Al-Qassam cyber fighters were a group that were active a couple of years ago, about 3 years, actually 3 years ago now, where they were attacking financial institutions in the United States. And these folks would literally say, we're going to attack your bank on this day at this time for this amount of time. And they were true to their word. When they showed up, they attacked and they held you down. There was nothing you could do. And luckily, there were solutions that were able to roll out and fix these sort of things. But these guys were very effective and true to their word. The really interesting thing here is that when Ahmadinejad left power, these guys went quiet. But their platform that they used was a platform called Brobot that was built extensively on WordPress installations, because WordPress, I've run one WordPress site of my own since 2005. It is the most unbelievable love-hate relationship I've ever had. It's easy to use, but it's a nightmare to secure. But that being said, I still love WordPress. And they use this platform, what they call Brobot, and they could attack sites and pivot their attack within 5 minutes. So if they were attacking your site and you figured out a way to block it, 5 minutes later, they were up and running with a new attack. And they were really good at it. But yes, they've gone relatively dormant. Now, the types of attacks that you'll see primarily against your sites are volumetric. Those are the really easy ones. Application layer, a little bit requires some sort of intellect, and protocol attacks. So, you'll note here that this slide is from Q1 of 2016. The top 3 attacks that we're seeing across our platform, your mileage may vary depending on where you get your data, is SQL injection, local file inclusion, and cross-site scripting. Now, a reminder, Giorgio's giving his talk later about cross-site scripting and things to that effect. So, something to take a look at. But these are attacks that are happening across our platform today. We flash forward to this past quarter, top 3 in Q4 of 2016. SQL injection, local file inclusion, cross-site scripting. And the reason that you see these things coming across at different types of sites is that they work. Now, this is why I love standing in front of a room full of developers. How many people in here are familiar with OWASP? Oh, thank you. I'm glad. Next time I see you guys, I want to see everybody put their hands up. So OWASP.org is a group that you really should check out for web security related issues. And I'm assuming by virtue of the fact you're in here, there's some level of interest. So SQL injection has been on their top 10 list of security issues for over a decade. Realistically, I think it's about 13 years now. If we are sanitizing our inputs and sanitizing our outputs to our various applications, this problem goes away. This is something that we can fix collectively today. And unfortunately, when you have time to market issues and things to that effect, and you have to get your application delivered, sometimes security gets bypassed. And security should be baked into the front end. You can pay €1 up front, or you can pay 100,000 euros at the back end when everything gets breached and all the data for your customers gets dumped online. Something to consider. And there's all sorts of types of attacks that they'll do, attackers will do volumetrically. And I say attackers very specifically because hacker, as far as I'm concerned, is anybody with a security mind and a curiosity. An attacker shows the criminal intent. And they will launch anything they can find to throw at you. And volumetric attacks are one of the things that drive me absolutely bonkers. Now, I'm dating myself when I ask this question. Do we have any StarCraft fans in the room? Good. I got 2, 3. All right, awesome. 4. So this was a multiplayer online game back in the 90s. And we would play, you build up your resources, and then you would attack the various camps. And the really interesting thing is when you flash forward today and you look at websites and distributed denial of service attacks, this is very much the same sort of animal. I would build up my army, and all of a sudden the Zerg would show up, these characters here, and they would destroy literally everything. Drove me nuts until I figured out cheat codes, but that was a good day when I found those. But this is very much the same sort of thing that we're seeing today, and this is not a problem that's going away anytime soon. So when you build your website, it's all fancy with Flash. Don't put Flash on your website. Please, I beg of you. Yes, it looks really cool, but ... security nightmare. Your site can be absolutely overwhelmed in a rather trivial fashion. And there's all kinds of reasons for this. When we look at the types of reflectors that attackers use on a quarter-by-quarter basis, this is just from the Q4 of this year, we see stuff like character gen, DNS, NTP, ssdp. Character gen. If your printer is attached directly to the internet and this port is available, guess what? You are more than likely have just participated in a distributed denial of service attack. Also, why is your printer attached directly to the internet? One of these things you have to consider. NTP, Network Time Protocol. If you are patched on your network to current or N-1, an attacker cannot leverage your stuff to launch an attack. It's that simple. So if we're practicing better website hygiene, better hygiene for our networks, these problems go away and we do not end up participating as an attacker. And these sort of things, as you can see from let's see if this laser works, yay! NTP here accounted for 60% of the overall reflection attack traffic that we saw across our platform in Q3. When we jump to Q4, we see ssdp. Now, ssdp, or Simple Service Discovery Protocol, is part of Universal Plug and Play. This is something where you just take your device that you get from your various stores, plug it in, and just automatically works because it's built in that way. I wrote an article in Forbes a couple of years ago about this being used as a reflection attack for distributed denial of service. I got a very nasty note from a group called the Universal Plug and Play Consortium. Didn't even know that was a thing. They were very upset with me for writing this article. They said, Universal Plug and Play is perfectly safe. And I went, data. We have raw data. And they still wouldn't listen to me, even though I was able to present them actual data. They still wanted me to take it down because they said it's perfectly secure. And this is one of those fundamental problems that we have, is we can't just wave our hands and say, this is not the application you're looking for. These attacks and the attackers are coming at you fast and furious. Now, in Q2 of 2016, weird little dip there. We've never been able to puzzle out what happened there. But usually the number of attacks per site are 30 and above at this point and climbing. And this is just for one particular site as an example. So an attacker is not just going to hit you once and have a nice day. They're going to keep coming back because it's very simple for them to do that. And I'll talk about why it's that simple later on. This is a horrible eye chart, but I will just skip past that simply because it is really mean of me to put that up there. So as we're going through here and we're looking at this is from July 14th of this past year right through into October 16th of this year. These are various types of attacks that we saw from different types of botnets that were out there. We saw Mirai, Bill Gates, yes, that's actually a botnet, Chitin, XOR, and Spike. Spike has been around for years. And if we look over here, we saw that a Spike botnet was used to launch a 517 gigabit attack against the site. So just because code is old and maybe forgotten doesn't mean it's not still effective and cannot cause you some serious harm. So these are volumetric types of attacks. And when we switch over and we look at application-based attacks, such as SQL injection and all the rest of it, we realize that there aren't as many in comparison to volumetric attacks, simply because volumetric attacks are really, really simple to do. And when we look at and break it out, application layer attacks, bless you, application layer attacks really boil down to about 3 to 4% overall. Almost all of it is volumetric because it's very simple. The bar has been lowered to such a point where anybody can be an attacker. And I'll talk about that a little bit in a moment. So when we switch over and look at these web application attacks worldwide, we see that United States is one of the biggest, or actually it is categorically the biggest source of attacks overall. Now we jump forward and we say, okay, we'll look at EMEA. We see some of our favorites here. Well, Germany, Russia, and UK are the biggest sources of attacks. Italy, not so bad. But when we look at the targets, the target, number one, United States. So if you're familiar with the TV show The Simpsons, where there's one character that says, stop hitting yourself, stop hitting yourself. This is really what I see when I see this sort of thing. Why are they constantly attacking each other? Because simply the vast majority of high-profile e-commerce sites are based there. And so it makes sense when you put it out that way. Now, eye chart number 2. So down this side, we have types of attacks. We have SQL injection here, local file inclusion, cross-site scripting. You see a theme developing here. Over here, we have the different types of verticals. Retail has been the recipient of the most number of attacks in Q4, hands down. It is absolutely amazing. Why? The attackers historically went after financial institutions because they have the money. Makes sense. But over time, financial institutions have adapted and they have done a far better job of securing their enterprises so that the attackers can't do these sort of things. So where do the attackers go next? Retail. Same information, easier target. Hotel and travel, that's growing as well. A lot of hotel and travel sites are in dire need of help from a security perspective. And financial services has dropped up rather significantly. So it's not just breaking in, stealing sort of things. It's also people showing up and holding a virtual gun to your head. Extortion-based attacks are something that have been around since God was a Boy Scout, but now it has taken on a bit of a different spin. DD4BC is a group that spun up a couple years ago, and one of the things that we saw in our data, we saw a group that turned out to be these characters that were attacking sites with their new platform, and they would attack with a burst of traffic, send an email saying, we've just attacked you, this is what we did, check your logs. If you don't respond with X amount of Bitcoin, we're going to attack you again. But the amount of Bitcoin they were asking for would end up equating to about 50 to 100 euros. Really didn't make any sense until we realized in hindsight they were just testing their platform to see how it would work. That number has since changed significantly. So here's an example of an email from 2015 that they sent to one of our customers. It said, hi, let us introduce ourselves. Here's 3 articles that somebody wrote about us. We'd like to use that to pimp ourselves. And then, or just Google DD4BC. So they have got brand awareness. It's amazing when you think about it. Now it's your turn. All of your servers are going to come under attack unless you pay us 30 Bitcoin. Now, last time I checked, that was between $1,000 and $1,200 US dollars per Bitcoin. So the stakes had risen significantly at that point. And this hasn't gone away. We jump forward here and we look at DD4BC. Some of the members of DD4BC were actually arrested by Europol. What became of them is a little bit curious because nobody seems to have been talking about it since they were arrested, and I find that very interesting, so I don't know what they became of them. But people said, oh great, this extortion problem is going to go away. Not so much. The problem here is they had already established a precedent. They had established a precedent that was working because people were paying the ransom, because they thought that if they paid the ransom, the attackers would go away. If I'm a criminal and I come and steal money from you and say, don't tell anybody, and you don't tell anybody, guess what? I'm going to come back and see you in a month. Now, Armada Collective is a group that followed suit. And they said, oh, great, it worked for DD4BC, we're going to try it. We're going to launch our own attacks. And they did. Problem is their type of attack was far different. They would send an email saying very much the same sort of thing, demanding money, and people would pay. But out of all the attempts that they made, only once did they ever launch an attack, and it was from a single home router doing an ICMP flood. For those of you not aware, that doesn't really work anymore. So these folks made $100,000 simply by threatening people because the precedent had already been set by DD4BC and other groups. Now here is an email from this year. You'll notice January 11th of 2017. Hi, if you don't pay this amount of Bitcoin, 8 Bitcoin, so $8,000, you're going to be attacked, such and such. Do you see something familiar here? It's like the same menu. But in this case, these guys called themselves the Stealth Ravens, were actually attacking sites all throughout the Asia-Pacific region. The really funny thing here is the attacks that they were launching were actually pretty small, 1.5 gigabits to about 5 gigabits of traffic, against financial institutions that were not properly protected. The funny thing here is, well, not really funny for them, but the curious thing here is they were actually be able to hold these particular financial websites down because they didn't have the resilience baked in, they didn't have the ability to withstand that sort of traffic. So imagine they had some sort of like an RSP season that we have in Canada or something to that effect where everybody's trying to get in and register for their financial products at the same time. That would be far more traffic than this particular denial of service attack. So this is something that they had to really address. And something I've noticed with various sites throughout Europe where if they came under any sort of load, they would drop. And when I'm talking about dropping with these amplification attacks, we have eye chart number 3. So DNS, NTP, character gen, and ssdp. The theme continues. So I just got to lean over, I can't remember now. Q4 of 2015 right through to present day. You'll see it's either steady or slightly bigger than the quarter before it. And the amount of traffic that we're generating, darn it, my bad. That one, there we go. So DNS is usually a configuration issue. NTP, again, a configuration issue. If we have to make sure that we're doing proper hygiene for our sites. Character gen, the printers, and ssdp. The theme continues. And the attackers are using it because it's available and because we are making it available. And it doesn't have to be this way. So the types of tools, now what I was talking about earlier is the bar had been lowered significantly for an attacker. And this is how low it has gotten. So this is a SQL injection tool from a few years ago called Havage. It's still floating around out there. Very simple. You put in your URL and you press go, basically, and it works. I've used this in a lab, and it works very well against a test server. Don't try this against a live site that you will go to jail. OWASP, who I mentioned earlier, has a tool called SQL Map. Very much a similar type of idea, and it's very good for testing your own site. Can't emphasize that enough. Now, being Canadian, I love my donuts. So one of the tools that really caught my attention was one called Donut. Now, again, this is how simple things have gotten. Put in the URL and press start. You have just become an attacker. This is launching thousands upon thousands of GET requests against the site. And the traffic that you're seeing through your logs is really not that dissimilar from regular website traffic. Jump ahead to Hulk, which is the HTTP Unbearable Load King. I love that name. Again, very similar traffic. And the only difference here with this tool is they could actually change the agent string. So the traffic you're seeing against your website, your web properties, is really not that dissimilar from a regular traffic. Now, the attackers realized that using these sort of tools, if they were able to map it out to a wider audience, they could do far more damage. Particular here is low orbit ion cannon from a few years back. This was put out by the group Anonymous, and the whole idea here initially was to attack whitehouse.gov. In that particular case, whitehouse.gov said, change the IP address, and the attack didn't work. But the really interesting thing here is the attackers used the disposable workforce that I talked about earlier, the disaffected teens and such. They were able to give them this tool, and it's got a bunch of configuration issues, and it made it a little bit difficult. So the attackers, the next time around, they came out with the high orbit ion cannon. You'll notice the big difference here is you just have to click the button, fire the lasers. So as a defender, as somebody who's running a website, it has become very, very difficult because it is so simple for an attacker to come for you. So you have to really do a good job of making sure your websites are secured. Now, Brobot that I talked about earlier, this was a great example of compromised WordPress installations, and a few Joomlas in there as well, but primarily WordPress installations, because far too often I'll find WordPress installations across the internet that are up and running, look great, but haven't been patched in years. To put a finer point on it, just a little over a year ago, I found a WordPress installation in Russia that was up and running version 1.0. Version 1.0 came out in 2004. I don't know how it wasn't knocked over. Also, it could have been a honeypot just to trick me. I don't know. So we'll flash forward to 2016. In 2016, we heard of the Mirai botnet. Is everybody in here familiar with the Mirai botnet? One person. Okay. So I got my work cut out here. This here was code that was developed that attacked IoT devices, Internet of Things. It was able to compromise DVRs, also, I want to say coffee makers, but I know that wasn't true, but all sorts of devices like that, and use them to attack various websites. The problem here was something so simple that it makes me crazy. This is directly from the code for that particular botnet. You'll notice root, admin. These are all default credentials in these IoT devices. Programmatically, it is dirt simple to set it up so that when you open your new shiny widget and you log in the first time, it says you have to change your password on a first login. It's simple. And yet, millions of devices were compromised and used to attack various types of sites. Example. So we have here the first major Mirai botnet. 2.5 million IP addresses that were participating in that. Then we see the Dyn DNS attack, which only part of the Mirai botnet participated in. Now, Dyn, I'm not beating up on them. They are a DNS provider. One of the problems here, as they showed with this is their graphic, they showed this is the outage all over the United States. The problem here wasn't that they got knocked over. It was that their customers were using single source DNS. They weren't using secondary. They weren't using tertiary. So that when their single DNS provider went down, they got knocked out. It was done. And you can build all the wonderful Java code and all the rest of it that you want, but it's not going to work if you can't get to it. Then we flash up to, okay, I'm doing well. So tools like Wget. Wget is a great command line tool for doing work on websites. Unfortunately, in United States and Europe, not too long ago, within the last 2 years, had various talking heads within political circles that said this is a hacker tool. This caused me a great deal of consternation because look at a hammer. With a hammer, I can build you a wonderful house, or I can beat you about the head and neck. It doesn't change the fact that it's a tool, it's the intent. Obviously, proving intent is the difficult aspect, but taking away our tools, we're never going to build the house. Now, as we're going through all of the data that we have on our platform, we get to see all sort of trends developing. Like, for example, we saw DD4BC before it was a going concern. We just didn't realize at the time the extent of what it was going to become. The one thing that really gets me is, with the various types of attackers, is their ability to grandstand for the media. If you're going to commit a criminal act, is your first priority to jump in front of a TV crew from a news company in the UK? Do you want to do and sit down with a reporter from Wall Street Journal? It doesn't really make sense, but this is a lot of what we were seeing. And as a result of this, a lot of these attackers got rounded up and arrested, but they really did bring to the forefront of the mainstream media the idea of the commoditization of distributed denial of service. Now, what I mean by this is we've gone from sourcing to a distributed workforce of individuals to building SaaS platforms where the attackers can actually rent it out to you. And these platforms are built on things like home routers, something like that. And now we flash forward today, we add in the aspect of Mirai, we have DVRs and all the rest of it. You can really extend this out. One thing I should point out with Mirai, the biggest attack that we recorded on our platform was 623 gigabits of traffic. That was raw traffic. If they had figured out how to do a reflected attack, wow, that could have been really ugly. Thankfully, they didn't yet. So, one example of a group that likes to get in front of the cameras is the Lizard Squad. And the Lizard Squad is a loose collective of individuals, some of which who have been arrested, who built out this platform based on code from another group called Titanium Stressor. The owner of Titanium Stressor, or the creator of Titanium Stressor, is now in prison. But the code that they took from him, they set up this platform where you could actually go in, rent services, and attack whoever you're irritated with that day. And this amount of code was actually not configured well. So they didn't even have HT access files on their directory. So we were able to download all of their users. And then a couple weeks later, Brian Krebs wrote about it, and we're like, we should have written about that, but oh well. Here's an example from Lizard Stressor, which is Lizard Squad's tool. This is the various types of packages you can sign up for. 7,200 seconds here. It's $69.99 a month, and I'm assuming they meant US currency. But $69.99 a month. In Canada, it costs you more for an Americano from Starbucks per day than it is to be an attacker. You can launch a denial of service attack for less than a cup of coffee a day. Let that sink in for a second. Now, these sort of platforms are based out on two real key components. There are other pieces to it, but there's the booter, which is a piece that came out of multiplayer gaming where they could attack. If somebody was doing better on Destiny than you were and you were upset about it, you could knock them off. The attackers found out very quickly that not only did you knock them off, you took 1,000 of their closest friends with them. Then we add in the stressor. The stressor is a legal artifact. They like to say that stressor because they're saying, oh, we're providing you the platform. How you choose to use it is completely up to you, which doesn't really fly because there is yet to be a sound case here. Unless you look back to the 90s. In the 90s, I was working for a financial institution. We did hire a firm that would actually throw junk traffic at our website so we could test its load. Obviously, it was our test site. And they would throw all this out. And it's very similar to what we see now. Obviously, this platform is meant as an attack tool, but they might be onto something, especially when you consider that bug bounty programs, who thought they would be a thing 10 years ago? And now they're a very effective tool for a lot of organizations. They might be onto something. So I'm going to warn the audio guy. How are we doing on the volume? Are we going to be okay? I'm going to play a video coming up in a second. I just want to make sure I'm not going to kill you. Okay. All right, so here are some of the examples here, and the one at the bottom, Big Bang Booter, this isn't a good platform as an attack tool, but they are very good at marketing themselves, so hopefully this volume thing works out. Not too bad? All right. Okay, rather than kill your ears, I'm going to... Over here? Oh, right here? Okay. Ah. Yeah, it was set on kill. All right. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Mine's gone now. Okay. Ah, that's better. All right, so my mic is gone. My mic is gone. All right. All right, so I'm going to talk really loud right now until my mic comes back. This particular thing here, they're showing their marketing ability. You can hear me? Okay, all right. They can show their marketing ability here, and they're saying all kinds of wonderful things, like they have custom source code. Then they jump and they say, hit like a boss. They're trying to build you up. They want you to be excited about their product offering. But there? It's, doesn't even. All right. Never fun without technical issues. All right, as we go forward, we have 8 different types of attack methods and 24/7 friendly support. So, rather than belabor that any longer, it really just goes to show that how they are positioning themselves, how they view themselves. And these are the attackers that you, as writing code, writing applications, things like that, these are the folks you have to go up against. They see themselves as a legitimate enterprise, and they're going to come for you because there's a monetary value for them. People pay to use these services. Other highlights that we saw from our platform, and I'm down into the last 3 minutes, is things like data breaches fueling login attacks. And this is a real problem. Skip that. If we look at denial of service as a function over time, if we go from here in Q1 of 2015 right through to Q4 of 2016, we see the amount of attack traffic is growing. Each one of these dots represents an attack, and the higher up on the scale represents a greater amount of intensity. It's really not that big of a stretch to think in a couple of years that's going to be a solid black line. Now, some of the other operations we see as SQL injection. This is something I keep hammering on because it's not going away. It is still there. It is something that we have the ability to collectively fix, and we can go out and do that. So, if you don't do that, SQL injection things, you're going to end up in a problem like this. This is Tony Hunt's site called haveibeenpwned.com. This is a site that actually indexes all sorts of data breaches, and you can check your email address to see if it's been involved in a data breach. Now, the thing here to understand is that I don't recommend you put your address in there. I trust Tony, but it's one of those things. Or sorry, Troy. Why do I keep calling him Tony? I don't know. Because if you don't, you end up things like this. Now, this is a visual representation from informationisbeautiful.net. Great site, if you're into data visualization, that is. So this is from a year ago. I took this screenshot. Now, went back and did the same thing about 3 weeks ago, and this is what you see now. This is why SQL injection is a big hobgoblin for me. And hey, I'm back. So this is a real problem because we see stuff like mail sites, we see election sites, all sorts of fun stuff like that, citizenship databases. This is something we have to take a real thing because attackers will take those passwords that they get and dump them onto sites like Pastebin, GoSpin, all the rest of it, so that other attackers can use them to run them through tools like this. And when they do this, they're checking to see if you're using the same username and password on multiple sites. Because if you're doing this, they're able to get into your Amazon site, your banking site, whatever it happens to be, and there's a financial gain for them because they can get your cash. They can take out gift cards and things to that effect. So it's something to be aware of. And SQL injection, another problem that we see is stuff like RevSlider. RevSlider is a wonderful plugin for WordPress installations that had a rather serious SQL injection problem. And that ended up with 100,000 plus sites having an upload shell installed on their sites. The folks at RevSlider did a great job. They fixed this very, very quickly, to their credit. The problem here is the damage was already done. And this is an example here. We look at stuff like this. These CVE numbers are categorizations of vulnerabilities. The vulnerabilities that we saw in the particular instance were stuff like this from 2009, 2012, 2008. When I originally did that slide, it was in 2015. So these are problems that had been known about for years but had not been fixed. And the attackers were more than happy to leverage them. And if we don't take the time to fix these sort of things, we end up with an undead army of our own systems attacking other sites. And it's not that long before law enforcement, government shows up and says, you were participating in this attack, you're culpable. Where it's not true, it's still something you have to worry about. So you have to worry about SQL injection is a solvable problem. Harden your systems. Work with your upstream ISPs. If you're not already moved into the cloud and you're still doing it with upstream ISPs, they may have some sort of mitigation strategy to help you in the case of an attack. The one I'll jump right down to that really gets me is patch your systems. And I can't emphasize this enough because right now I'm doing a talk coming up in a couple months where I've gone through the breaches or published breaches for 2016. And in that particular case, it was looking at all the different types of attacks. And so many of them were because systems were not patched to current or N-1. So as you're reading these articles, look through them and think, what's the data? Don't just accept the story for what it is. Now I'll just skip past that and go, a lot of the information that we have here is from our State of the Internet report, which is free. You can use it to your heart's content. It comes out quarterly. And what else? Yes, this wouldn't be possible without my fellow researchers at Akamai, who makes things really good in that respect. We're hiring, and thank you all for putting up with me, and I greatly appreciate it. And since I'm at time, if you want to, you can reach out to me on Twitter or via email if you have any questions, because I don't want to run into the next speaker. Thank you very much.